Hello and welcome. At what point should military projects to rebuild a country cross over into the world of civilian aid and development? It's a fine line that could be starting to endanger those who are non-military but working mainly in conflict zones. In places such as Iraq and Afghanistan, there is more and more of this blurring of military assistance and traditional aid, often criticized by those in the NGO community as militarization of aid. They say it puts their mission and their workers in far more danger, as insurgents and combatants find it hard to differentiate who is who. For organizations in Iraq, tough choices are constantly being made about whether or not to work in a country under occupation and how closely they should coordinate with military forces if they do stay. For NGOs in Afghanistan, the choices are even more complicated, as insurgent groups question the links aid organizations have to the military's provincial reconstruction teams. On today's show, we ask, is foreign aid becoming a military tool? And if so, what does that mean for aid workers on the ground and the people they help? Remember, you can join in the conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or email, and we'll also welcome your phone calls onto the show. Joining me from New York is Dr. George Rupp, the president of the International Rescue Committee, or IRC, a non-governmental organization that provides emergency relief and refugee assistance in around 42 countries. Previously, Dr. Rupp served as the president of Columbia University in New York. Here in Washington, D.C., I'm joined by Jeff Grieco, Chief of External Affairs for International Relief and Development, or IRD, the largest non-profit implementer of U.S. foreign assistance. IRD works closely with U.S. State Department, USAID, and the Department of Defense. Previously, Mr. Grieco served as USAID's Assistant Administrator for Legislative and Public Affairs. Gentlemen, I welcome you both to the show.
Thank you, Rich.
Dr. Rupp, if I could start with you, sir, in New York there, and let me ask you exactly how you see aid being militarized. What sort of examples do you come across?
Well, you mentioned in your intro the provincial reconstruction teams in Afghanistan and also in Iraq. I think they are an example of the line being crossed. We will not work with awards given through provincial reconstruction teams, because even though they have nominal civilian presence, they are completely dominated by the military and make it very difficult to distinguish the kind of humanitarian assistance and reconstruction that we do from what the military is doing.
So doesn't it make sense, though, in this in particularly difficult conflict zones such as Iraq and Afghanistan, for the military to take a greater lead even in such developmental issues?
Well, I think the military plays an absolutely crucial role, and the establishment of security is necessary for assistance to be able, and especially for development to be possible. But that is the role that the military should play, rather than also then crossing over into doing humanitarian relief and development that can be done much more efficiently and effectively by non-government organizations. The International Rescue Committee is an example. We have over 400 staff in Afghanistan. They're almost all Afghans. We're present in 1,500 villages doing reconstruction work that is identified and implemented by local communities. And it is crucial for our staff that not be confused with the ongoing military operations.
Well, so we'll examine more of that in a second. Let me bring in Jeff Grieco here, and good to have you join us on the show as well. I gather your agency, IRD, is the only implementer of aid willing to work with the military in conflict zones. Why is that?
I think we're one of the few that has really built a practice around this. For us, IRD's approach was to step back a minute and look at what is the mission that we're trying to accomplish. Are we trying to lower child mortality rates? Are we trying to stabilize a community that's rife with conflict? And then we have to figure out the best way to do that. If it means that we have to work with a military organization to do that for security reasons, as George has denoted, I think we're perfectly prepared to do that if it means that our mission can get accomplished and we're going to succeed in our mission. So for us, it's mostly been a tactical approach, and we've needed to do it in that way.
I'm going to put a couple of quotes to you. The first is from the Feinstein International Center at Tufts University, which does a lot of work on international humanitarian assistance, which says, aid agency staff is being increasingly targeted by the Taliban and other insurgents for their perceived instrumentalization by and support of alien political agendas. That's from Antonio Donini, Afghanistan Humanitarianism Under Threat. And the second quote's from William Frey, the mission director of USAID in Afghanistan, which says, without COIN, or counterinsurgency, and without the military support, many of the humanitarian agencies that raise such complaints about militarization of aid would not be able to enter the area area once controlled by insurgents. I know, Mr. Grieco, you agree with William Frey's sentiments there, but how about that first comment by the Feinstein International Center about the targeting of aid agency staff and how they really become much more vulnerable and targeted as a result of this?
Yeah, I could tell you from a personal experience, I had to bring home from Sudan last year, a year and a half ago, one of our USAID employees who was assassinated by an al-Qaeda cell in Khartoum. Aid workers are at risk constantly in the field, whether or not they're in the field actually doing development programming, or they're at the mission headquarters, sometimes in the capitals in which they work. So in order to be able to do our job, we have to have a very detailed knowledge of the security environment, the political environment, the cultural environment that's going on the ground. And as a result of that, IRD has felt that the best way to engage when we can in high conflict zones like Afghanistan is to do it in cooperation with the military, so that we're part and parcel of a strategy.
Now, Dr. George Rupp, I want to get your perspective on those quotes, and in particular the idea of aid agency workers being targeted more. What experiences has the IRC had?
Well, we've had a lot of different experiences over the more than 20 years that we've been in Afghanistan, but I can state that we have found ourselves to be in more precarious situations after the presence of PRTs than before the presence of PRTs, since we have been in insecure areas both before and after. I'd like to be clear, though, that we certainly are fully prepared to coordinate with the military, to share information with the military, to coordinate our planning with the military. We think it's nonetheless very important that there be a clear line between what the military does, namely where its comparative advantage is, providing security, and where the comparative advantage of development and assistance agencies is, namely in providing development assistance, in particular that is based in acceptance by local communities.
A couple more email questions here from viewers, and the first one to Chef Grieco, if I could put this to you, sir, from Abdul M. Ismail in the UK, who wrote in saying, the intense scrutiny on civilian military contractors is forcing them to constantly look for new sources of income. Tapping into this aid goldmine will ensure shareholders continue to profit from the continuation of conflict because war is big business. How do you address those concerned with the lines blurring and this issue of militarization of aid? Because I know you don't see it as militarization as such, do you?
Yes, no, we don't see it as militarization. I think we have to delineate in two ways. First is relief and relief operations primarily resulting from a natural disaster, or in some cases a man-made disaster. None of our relief organizations have a military force, an airlines, or an ability to move large quantities of emergency aid into a country, because in that kind of a disaster, seconds are lives lost. So we need sometimes military assistance to help project our emergency assistance into areas. Burma is one of the recent ones where the U.S. military was a key because the NGO community was not allowed to bring in anything into the country to help save lives. Now, separate from that is the development model and the stabilization approach that's currently ongoing in Iraq and Afghanistan. In those cases, you've got to step back and say, listen, are we making progress on the ground with what we're attempting to do? And in Afghanistan's case, just after 9/11, Afghanistan had the worst child mortality rates in the world, bar none. The second highest, I believe, in maternal death rates in the world. After a 5-year vaccination program put on by USAID and a host of other international aid agencies, Afghanistan's child mortality rates have dropped dramatically, and the maternal death rates are dropping dramatically. That program was undertaken with full cooperation of the military forces on the ground, Afghan police forces helping to secure clinics in communities. So it's not militarizing, it's helping the people themselves.
Is your philosophy basically then results whatever the method to some degree?
Within reason, yes, of course. I think we have to be very careful about the cultural and the political sensitivities on the ground in the communities that we work. Every program that we implement at IRD is done with a community-focused model. We engage the community, let them decide how the program is going to be implemented. We help to shepherd that and develop accounting and performance reporting so that it's done in the right way.
Well, Dr. George Rupp, if I could put this to you from Saudi Arabia, from Syed Zaki Ahmed, who wrote in saying, elite capitalist nations such as America portray aid packages to poorer countries as charity. In reality, this money is an investment that enables the colonial powers to maintain their influence. Foreign aid is a tool of control. A comment on the cynicism and skepticism that a lot of people have when it comes to aid agencies in general. sir?
Well, I think if one looks at the 20 years of the history of the IRC in Afghanistan, it would be very hard to sustain that contention. We were present long before, during all those years when the United States withdrew, when the Soviet Union was present. We were working at the community-based level on initiatives that were embraced by the community, and our security was that we were accepted by those members of the community. If I could move from that question from Saudi Arabia for just a second back to the comment Jeff made about Indonesia. We also were present in Aceh because there was a conflict there at the time that the tsunami hit. And so we were well positioned, had Indonesian staff, including staff from Aceh. We were well positioned to respond quickly, but we were perfectly willing and did coordinate with the military for precisely the reason that Jeff said. The military, including the U.S. military, had the logistical capacity to get needed supplies and materials in on a very short turnaround basis. There was no blurring of lines. They were helpful in supporting the efforts of both local NGOs and international NGOs on the ground. The IRC has no problem with that kind of cooperation. It's very different when the military is involved directly in the implementation of humanitarian programs, as especially in the early days of the PRTs it was in Afghanistan. That creates great problems of security, in particular for our Afghan staff, whose security derives from the fact that we are accepted by the villages in which they work.
Dr. Rupp, let me ask you then, at what point do you feel this militarization, as it's referred to, of aid occurred? At what point did it happen? Was it basically with the provisional reconstruction teams, the PRTs, or was it, I mean, the expanded use of contractors, private military contractors?
Well, there was a danger that it would occur in the very earliest years when we went into Iraq. As a result, a small number of the largest aid organizations, organized by the International Rescue Committee, wrote a letter to President Bush specifically conditioning our participation in what we assumed were going to be major dislocations of people, explicitly conditioning our participation on an explicit assurance that we would not be supervised by what then was called ORHA under General Garner, the Office for Reconstruction and Humanitarian Assistance, and later became the CPA, the Coalition Provisional Authority. We got such assurances. They were appended to all of our agreements to work inside Iraq. So that was an example where there was a danger of militarizing NGO participation, and it was averted. I think it's fair to say that changed over time in Iraq, and the provincial reconstruction teams in Afghanistan represented a further step in that direction, one that I'm cautiously optimistic will now be reversed now that Rajiv Shah is the new administrator of USAID. And I think Secretary Clinton and Secretary Gates and Special Envoy Holbrooke all understand the importance of having NGOs preserve their own separate identity from the military effort.
Okay, gentlemen, I'm going to ask you to both stand by. We've got to take a very short break here, but we're back with more of our discussion in a moment. Don't go away.